Right, this is for year 10. Some clues to help you with your work today, because I'm looking at them thinking a few of you will be going, I have to think, how am I going to do this? I need some help. So I'm going to do that. So first of all, travel. Well, come on. You know what crime has to do with travel. We've looked at a specific case study. All I'm going to say is Claude Duval. And not only that, it gives you some clues on what it would have happened. It would have meant law enforcement became increasingly difficult because you could commit a crime and move. There needed to be some sort of, let's say, organisation that can coordinate crime across the whole country. And did that get introduced in the industrial period? Education. Well, the printing press had an impact in the early modern period when barely anybody could read. You had town criers reading things out. Now, almost everybody could read by the end of the industrial period. Think of the impact on spreading news and that sort of thing. Work, peaks and troughs. We did about a bit of this in the early modern period. How is the fact that sometimes almost everybody's got a job, and other times people are really struggling to feed their families and get a job? How's that going to affect crime? Voting rights. Well, if people have the right to vote, governments listen to them because they want their votes. Because if they don't get their votes, they don't get voted in, they don't have the job that they want, they don't have the power that they want. And because by the end of this period almost everybody had a vote, the government had to listen to the general population. And this relates to crime and punishment. I'm going to explain this one because it's difficult in two ways. But mostly, well, this is what kind of boils down to one way. If people are worried about crime, the government has to be seen to be doing something about criminals and about crime, or they won't get voted in. So this means government starts to do, like in the middle of the 19th century, the 1800s, they are a bit more harsh with prisons, because the general consensus was that criminals, they need it to be tough in there. And they need to not be given an inch because they're in there for a reason. They need to be punished. There's a lot of retribution ideas surrounding it. And also the penny dreadfuls and things, if you think of the printing press again, education, spreading the ideas that crime was out of control. The government had to do something to stop crime in the first place, so they maybe had to increase spending in the police or make sure the police was functioning properly, that sort of thing. So it had an impact on punishments, on the prisons, had an impact on law enforcement, and also it could have an impact on the law, because laws can be introduced to deal with problems that the public perceive. Harvests, well, it's linked to the job thing. At certain times, good harvest, bad harvest, in the early modern period, it meant that there were peaks and troughs of crime, but in this time it's less a problem because we had the British Empire around the world. If there was a bad harvest in England, might have less of an impact because we could just get food from one of the other countries, and it could be easily and cheaply imported. So in the early modern period, like that, because of harvests. In the industrial period, this is maybe a change for the better. I'll leave it with you. Wealth and taxes. Right, the country went from being quite a wealthy country to the most wealthy, prosperous nation in the entire world. That meant we could afford things. That meant we could afford a very expensive punishment, over £30,000, certainly over £20,000 per person per year. The punishment I'm thinking of costs now. What is that punishment? It's the most common punishment in this day and age. That wasn't possible before the industrial age, but because people had more money, and therefore were paying more taxes, because the government could charge them more, it meant that punishment was a possibility. And there was a particular law enforcement organisation brought into being in this period that is still with us today. Some of you might have family working in it. It begins with a P, and if you need a further clue, whoop whoop, it's the sound of the. There you go. And growing acceptance of government involvement links to this wealth and taxes. Before this period, it was like, government, stay out of my way. Your affairs are your affairs, my affairs are my affairs. Don't stick your nose in. But over the 150 years of the industrial period, it slowly became more and more accepted. In fact, not just accepted, but kind of expected that the government would step in and get involved with things across the whole spectrum of life, like education and stuff, but also with crime and punishment. And so, if things were a problem, it's the sort of thing that's important. What are the government doing about it? What are they doing about it? And it was becoming that sort of thing, so they would accept a police force, whereas before it was like, hold on a minute, these people sticking their nose into our lives, no, we don't want that. And there was a lot of criticism at the time when the police was created, that these police, they're just here to control us, they're not here to help us, and maybe that sort of feeling is still around now. I'm going off on a tangent here, but I know that police officers don't want you to talk to little children and sort of say, oh, I'm going to speak to the naughty police about you, because it makes a negative image in the child's head about the police. Rather you say, oh, the police are helpful, they're there to help, that's what they would prefer. Well, there was that sort of attitude of authority, but in the industrial period that attitude had relaxed, so that people were more accepting that government organisations could get involved in their lives, and that meant things like the police could happen. And finally, new ideas about human nature. Right, so although by 1900 this was starting to change, for a good chunk of the industrial period, people believed in Darwinism. Charles Darwin, natural selection. You might have done it in biology, but the premise is that things that don't survive die out, and things that are strong survive. Survival of the fittest, that sort of thing. I'm not a biology teacher, you might be able to tell. But effectively, if you've got an animal that is eating things off a tree, but then it can't reach it, it's going to starve to death and die. But the animal that's a bit taller will be able to eat the leaves that are on the tree and survive. And over time, the animals that were tallest could eat all the leaves off the trees, and the animals that were shortest died out. You end up with a giraffe with a really long neck. That's the idea. Now, believing in Darwinism and that sort of thing, and thinking that this theory, this works, led people to apply it to humans and think that humans are born as they are, and that's how they are. It's not nurture, but nature. Your nature determines what sort of person you are, not the influences in the environment around you. Nowadays, we think it's some sort of mixture of the two. But this led people to think you're born a criminal. When you're born, you're a little baby, you're predetermined that you're going to be a criminal. And this affects punishments, because until right at the end of this period, for most of the 1900s, when prisons became the main form of punishment, the prevailing thought was not to reform the criminal, but retribution and removal, because it's pointless trying to change them. They're born that way. If you think that it's all to do with your nature and your genetics, you'd think it's a complete waste of time trying to change the behaviour of a person who's a criminal, because it's just not going to happen. In the 1900s, this changes and they start to try to reform the criminal, but this prevailing view of Darwinism, it affects punishments. And before that, the bloody code, execute them, transport them, just get them away, because we're not going to change them. So there you go. The last few I went on a little bit longer with, 8 minutes and a half. You can write about all of the different things and how they affected law and order.